Good evening, welcome to the Deep 404. Tonight I want to start with a video of a Russian BMPIII. This is a light infantry vehicle. The footage here is showing it reportedly operating around Verbova. Now Verbova is in the Zaporozhye region. It is to the east of Robotny, and this is where we have seen the most sort of sustained push by the Ukrainians, I guess you could say, during the offensive. The Robotny-Verbova line was the planned line of approach down to Tokmak, and then from Tokmak to Melitopol on the Sea of Azov. Anyhow, let's just have a bit of a look at this. There's no sound with this, so I'll just sort of explain for the people who are just listening as to what is going on here. So what you can see here is a BMPIII. It's armed with one stabilised 30mm 2A42 autocannon with up to 500 rounds. It also has a machine gun for its own protection and a missile launcher. The 30mm cannon, however, is what you can see operating here. If you notice when it's firing, when the view is from the range, that on the left of the screen you can see the flash from the BMD as it fires, and then you can see where the grenades are exploding. The autocannon was developed as a replacement for a previous Grom gun. It has a dual feed, and it can fire at rates of 200 to 300 rounds per minute, or at a full rate mode at 500 to 800 rounds per minute. It can target soft-skin vehicles up to about 1.5 kilometers out, and light armored vehicles at 1.5 kilometers and 4 kilometers. It has a high explosive incendiary round, and this fuse in this round produces a 0.15 millisecond delay on impact and a self-destruct mechanism detonating the projectile after a number of seconds or distance from the muzzle. That can carry a crew of 3, a commander, a gunner, and a driver, and 7 or 8 infantry. And as you may have just noticed there in this footage, that the BMD has made its run towards the forested line of Ukrainian positions. It then approached a trench, and it stopped and seemed to disgorge about 5 infantrymen who are now making their own attack on those positions. Just let me get myself back here again. One moment and I will be able to continue. Just trying to coordinate my other windows here. All right. So, yeah, look, an interesting piece of footage that was, I thought, just showing the intensity of attack, just showing the amount of force that one vehicle can enact over an area. You could see the way that it was operating and shooting along that line, that forested line alongside a roadway. We've seen a lot of that. This is traditional in many countries where you have farmland, to plant a row of trees along a roadway and provide some windbreak for the crops and for the stock that may be living in that area. Of course, that gives some level of cover, and so both Russian and Ukrainian forces, infantry forces, are using these to progress forwards. The attack that you saw there ended up with 5 or so infantry being deployed, rushed up to the Ukrainian positions, given some serious cover from that 30mm cannon with incendiary explosive cannon rounds. And then you see those infantry get out and begin their own battle and way of moving towards the Ukrainian positions. In the last few seconds there was a picture of one of the Russian soldiers throwing a grenade, and you see the grenade exploding only 10 meters or so from his location. Again, just something as a reminder of what's actually happening on the ground there in this war. Moving on from that, I'm going to go through a battle update, the update along the front lines, a little bit later in this. But I just want to talk a little bit too now about President Volodymyr Zelensky. Now, Zelensky He is planning to head to Washington later this week. He has apparently a trip to Capitol Hill confirmed, and it's been scheduled in coordination with Biden administration. They are trying to put together a joint push to reinforce to the American Congress the approval for granting the White House's supplemental budget, which is a budget for more than $24 billion in additional aid to Ukraine. It needs to be approved by Congress, even though Biden can sign it off to begin with. Reportedly, now, last time Zelensky was in Washington, he gave that speech to Congress. You may remember it. He had the large Ukrainian flag there. It was signed by members of the American Congress. This time, I don't believe, or at least I've seen it mentioned, that he won't be speaking in front of Congress like he did last time. The situation in which he's going to Washington this time round is different to last time. Last time was prior to the offensive. He was able to go there talking up the offensive, asking for support, and being able to, do the salesman role of talking about what will come if we're supported and how it'll be a successful offensive for Ukraine, and this will be beneficial for the US, and you'll look great. Now he's going back there after 3 months of a failed offensive, with really nothing to show for it of any significance, no major towns captured, no major areas of land retaken, and growing reports from both Ukraine and the West and Russia of massive losses in terms of equipment, and perhaps more importantly in terms of manpower, of infantry. So the situation is different. Also, Biden, now the situation for Biden is different. Biden is under growing calls for his impeachment due to the activities of his son and himself, his son Hunter Biden, in Ukraine over the past number of years. Also, the tide itself in terms of the public opinion about Ukraine appears to be softening in terms of its support. The US national debt has pushed up to over $33 trillion, $44 billion, which is 98K of debt for every American. So the general public is now starting to question whether another $24 billion of aid given to Ukraine is really the way that they should be spending their tax dollars. And this is a funny thing to have to say this and remind people, but the money that the government gives away, and this is true for any government, the money that the government gives away is not really the government's money. It's taxed money. It's taxed from the people who live in that country, the people who maybe trade in that country and need to provide and to pay taxes. So while Joe Biden can say, yeah, I'm going to help you out Ukraine and give you all this money, the people who are actually giving that money to Joe Biden to give away are the taxpayers of America. Now, they, like many places and countries in the West, are suffering now under inflation, which is due in large part to the printing of money during the COVID period, when the Western economies were shut down. The governments shut them down. The governments then printed money to support people. Now, that money doesn't just grow on trees. It was printed by the reserve banks. That causes inflation. If you increase your monetary supply like that, then you have immediately generated inflation. It might take some time for that to become apparent and for it to flow through the economy, but that's when the real inflation happens. And that is what has happened in the West, and it's happening in the most of the Western nations, happening in the US, and people are starting to feel it and suffer for it. I don't know where you're watching this from. If I look at YouTube, there seems to be a lot of people watching the UK, Australia, New Zealand, America, Western nations. I imagine you will understand what I'm talking about. So those factors are against Zelensky having the same sort of warm reception that he had last time. I actually feel as though he may be having to tread a little carefully here in how much he demands. He'll have to try not to get upset like he sometimes does and start to accuse the US of not supporting it and that there'll be problems for the US. That sort of thing wouldn't go down well and may cause some of the members of Congress to more publicly begin to call for a stop to the end of the funding to Ukraine. But we'll see. Not only has he got those challenges when asking for this money, but food and food exports from Ukraine is becoming a problem. The UN Executive Director of the World Food Programme has claimed in an interview with the ABC that the world faces a desperate food situation, and this is due, in part anyhow, to Ukraine having pumped all the air out of the room. The director goes on to say, we of course understand that Ukraine is important, but there are other hotspots around the world, and that the UN program has been left without funds effectively, and this may cause its activities in Afghanistan to be stopped. So we're starting to see in other organisations that have traditionally been very friendly to the Ukrainian cause, now, maybe some cooling off, some slowing down. Comments like Ukraine has pumped all the air out of the room and absorbed all of our funds is not the sort of thing that Zelensky will want to be hearing when in, all the people he's asking for funds will want to be aware of, I suppose. Ukraine has also reportedly now filed lawsuits against Hungary, Poland and Slovakia, as those countries are not committing to buy under EU programs to buy Ukrainian grain and products. They are wishing instead to protect their own domestic producers. So this has been a challenge for Ukraine for some time. There have been a number of alleged causes to this, one of them purely economic, in that these nations, European nations, do not wish to be forced to purchase Ukrainian grain, as example. Now, while Ukraine wants that to help provide revenues while it's in war, these nations are protecting their own farmers and producers by saying that the Ukrainian grain is being sold at such a low cost that is undermining their domestic producers, and they are then unable to sell their products. Fair enough. I think any country, any leader of a country would understand the desire to protect your own producers. There have also, however, been claims that the Ukrainian products, grain products that have been sold into Europe, have contained toxins or carcinogens or products unsafe for human consumption. And that itself has been a cause for some of these having been, some of these shipments being rejected. So we combine that with the fact that there's no progress on the Black Sea Grain Initiative. That deal, Russia is staying out of that deal, not looking to re-enter that. We've spoken about that a number of times. We've spoken how there's also talk now of a separate Russian-Turkish grain deal being established, one which excludes Ukraine. There was something I reported on last week, which may have had some involvement with Qatar, interestingly. So in terms of food, either food sales and food export for Ukraine, they've got problems in that space as well. But not only food and food revenues being a problem, but energy is a problem, or is going to become a problem. Ukraine has suffered some damage to its energy infrastructure during this conflict. However, by most reports, the Russian missile strikes in these areas have been somewhat restrained. There is, however, some speculation now around social media, some commentators on this conflict, that Russia may be conserving, stockpiling some missiles in preparation for a winter offensive that will include a more substantial attack against Ukrainian energy infrastructure. Now, this could be done for a number of reasons. this may be done because the Russians wish to put additional political pressure on Zelensky. Now, if the Russians were to attack the energy infrastructure, the Ukrainian people begin to suffer. Now, Ukraine has attempted this approach with, for example, the drones it has been sending to Moscow. However, those drones that have been sent to Moscow by Ukraine have not had a significant impact upon the life of the people in Russia, in Moscow, and it hasn't added any political pressure to President Putin of Russia. However, a country like Ukraine, who's suffering and struggling terribly because of war, if the power is turned off in winter, that will cause real problem, and there will be real demands then by the people of Ukraine for their government to do something. Now, if Zelensky is in a position where he can't do something, then this may be something which contributes to him being overthrown, either overthrown internally or overthrown with assistance from the US, because the US realise that things are just going badly and looking really bad in Ukraine. So the Russians might do that for that person, for that reason, to remove that person from power. They may also do it as part of a military objective to actually take out the power supply in Ukraine so as to disrupt the manufacture of goods for war, to disrupt the repair of goods. Now, there are factories all over Ukraine, and some of those factories are used for repairing equipment which is damaged on the battlefield. Tanks, armoured personnel carriers, artillery pieces, all of those sort of things. Sometimes are damaged, become inoperable, they're picked up. Armies have large, very strong things like tanks and trucks and low loaders that are able to recover these vehicles, take them back to somewhere where they can be repaired. Now, in a very interesting article I saw on a Telegram channel this morning, someone was asking the question, well, why hasn't Russia just destroyed all these factories? And the response was that there are many, many factories across Ukraine, and that while bombing them, carpet bombing them, could be a possible solution, in reality, carpet bombing of these factories would bring those bombers into the range of Ukrainian air defences, and the Russians would lose their bombers, or at least some of them, and they don't need to. Instead, they can strategically and precision strike these factories with missiles. However, they don't have the number of missiles required to destroy all of the factories that are there in Ukraine. However, there's a smaller number of major energy infrastructure locations in Ukraine. Energy infrastructure tends to have big nodes, substations, power plants, power generation facilities, that type of thing. So what the Russians could do here is destroy the major energy generation areas and the major substations. Now, if that is done, then all of your smaller substations, whether they're damaged or not, become useless because they're not receiving power from the larger places. One of the reasons that the Russians will be holding back on this and haven't done this so far is that globally there aren't that many big transformers. Transformers sit in these big substations. So you have energy coming out of electricity coming out of a generation source, be it a nuclear power plant or a hydroelectric scheme or something like that. And then you have big transformers that take the energy out of there, transform it to a voltage level where it can be transmitted across the country, transmits across those long wires, those big A-shaped, sort of big person-shaped transmission towers. And then when they reach cities and towns, they have other smaller transformers, and they step down the voltage from the higher transmission voltages to the voltages you use in your homes. So the big transformers, there aren't a great deal of these around the world at any one time. There's not generally a great need for them all the time. So part of the reason that the Russians won't or will be careful about how they do enact any attacks, large attacks on the energy infrastructure, is that if these attacks occur in areas to the east of the Dnieper, area that Russia wants to retain, they won't want to destroy these transformers, because they'll want to, if these areas become part of Russia, they'll want to be able to energize them again relatively easily. So we may even see a gradient of attacks on the energy infrastructure across Ukraine, where the further west you go, once you get past the Dnieper, we may see quite extensive, heavy attacks taking out these big transformers and destroying energy and production capability. To the east of the Dnieper, we might see the Russians use a much softer approach. Perhaps destroy transmission lines, perhaps destroy smaller substations, but not the energy generation and the larger substations and transformers, keeping them intact so that they can then readily use them when they wish to redevelop these areas in the future, as they have done in areas like Mariupol, which were just destroyed in the fighting there. But now you see videos coming out of large numbers of apartment blocks being built, new roads being built, new facilities and schools all being built. So that you would imagine would occur in these other areas if the Russians do choose to take them, as the offensive continues. If they do choose to take Odessa, for example, you might find that while the port infrastructure is being damaged at this stage, the energy infrastructure in Odessa may be given a light touch, just to conserve some of that for later use. In a very interesting story related to energy in Ukraine that I saw today, now I didn't go too deep into this because it just seemed quite silly, but apparently one of the deputies of the Verkhovna Rada, which is the parliament in Ukraine, Serhiy Grivko, has announced the registration of a bill that proposes to enable prisoners to work off time off their sentence, literally working it off by generating electricity through bicycle generation plants. The plan is that they could reduce the term of their imprisonment by up to 3 days per month, but for no more than 10 months a year. So, in theory, they could reduce their imprisonment by 30 days per year. Now, let's just say that this is true. You can certainly generate electricity. You can convert food into mechanical energy and people sitting on bikes and converting electricity. If something like this is true, then again, I think this is an indication that the Ukrainians are aware that there may be strikes and problems coming this winter for their energy infrastructure, their energy grid, and they need to find any means possible to be able to keep the lights on in some areas. There was a report in the article that I was reading from that the Ministry of Energy of the Ukraine said that blackouts are not planned in winter, but that shutdown schedules are ready. There wasn't more detail there, but I think that they are certainly aware of the fact that they are likely to encounter blackouts and problems, and that if the Russians do make a concerted effort to disable the Ukrainian energy grid, that there will be blackouts through the winter. Now, the winter in Ukraine, if you remember, Ukraine is a country that gets very cold. Where I am in the South Pacific, we have mild winters. We occasionally get a frost. Your kids might go outside for a few days in the wintertime and be able to scrape frost off the windscreen of your car. In Ukraine, the ground freezes. We're coming up to that period of time now, the Rapotista, where the rains will come and the fighting will stop because the rains will come for a few weeks and the ground will turn to mud. And it certainly becomes unsuitable for heavy equipment. Even tracked vehicles like tanks struggle in the amount of mud that comes when these rains come. Remember, the Ukrainian soil is beautiful, rich, friable soil. It absorbs moisture well, holds it well. So when it rains, it becomes very muddy. However, a few weeks after that rains come, the temperature drops and then the ground will freeze. And so when the ground freezes, the fighting can recommence because now you're driving your tanks over ice. They can continue to proceed. But that means that this is a country that gets very cold. So not having power in what is a developed country, Ukraine is a developed country. So try to imagine if you're sitting at home, if you're watching this on the TV somewhere or on a laptop or a mobile phone, you're probably in a developed country, just imagine what it would be like if your power supply was taken out. You're trying to get by now on candles. You may be getting patchy periods of electricity. You're trying to heat food. You're beginning to go back to looking for wood and sources like that to be able to burn to heat food. So you can see the stress that would start to introduce to your life. The inability to work. I mean, if you've got a job, but you've got to find some way to keep the family warm, well, you're starting to take time off work to try and find wood or find oil or whatever it might be. So that kind of stress is coming to the people of Ukraine this winter if there are attacks on the energy grid there. Okay, now on to just another topic. So enough about what might be coming for the poor people in Ukraine. The F-35 that's missing. What the hell? This is a really interesting story, which I'm sure many of you will already be across. But so 2 days ago, an F-35 in South Carolina, in America, the pilot ejected from the F-35 and then the plane was lost. Now, I've got a picture of an F-35 here of what they look like. There's an F-35. These are America's most advanced stealth craft. The F-35 are worth somewhere north of $80 million each. And as someone I saw on Twitter today commenting that when they were in the army, that if they came back after practice and they were a few rounds short on what they'd been issued with and should have returned with, that they would be in serious trouble. And they were suggesting that someone losing an F-35, that their head would be rolling. Anyhow, this is an interesting tale. Now, this is a stealth fighter. This is meant to be hard to detect. So I guess it's conceivable that it was difficult for American radars to pick up and look for. Maybe there aren't that many radars in that area that are looking for stealth fighters, so that could explain it. But until earlier today, at least, and I'll come to this, it had been missing for a day. So there had been no reports of it crashing. There had been no reports of it landing anywhere. There had been no reports of it sighted, circling, or heading out to sea or anything like that. It was just gone. Now, a lot of speculation began about what might be happening here. And what's interesting, well, some of the ideas here are very interesting. Some of you may know, after, so we just had September 11, so we just had the anniversary of the 22nd anniversary of September 11. Many of you may know that commercial airliners after September 11 were required to be able to be remotely controlled if needed. So when your pilots are flying those planes, if there is a problem, in theory, they can be remotely controlled. Now, by who? Who has authorization to do that? I don't know. Perhaps it's Boeing and Airbus themselves. I'm not sure on the detail of that. But that was a requirement so as to be able to avoid future attacks like that. If someone thought a plane had been hijacked and was going to be flown into another building, then it could be remotely controlled and ideally landed somewhere safely. Now, this was one of the theories that came up with Malaysian Airlines MH370 with its strange disappearance. You know, some people commented at the time that, well, that plane could have been remotely controlled somewhere. So who knows? I don't know what happened with MH370. Another topic for another day. But is it possible that the F-35s have some system like that? We know that the Americans are working on fighter jets that are effectively drone versions of their fighters. So they have all the capability, they just don't have the pilot. And they are AI controlled and remotely controlled. They can be flown by a pilot remotely. Again, you get your planes in the sky, you don't have to worry about losing any life, which is great. You have a limited number of really good pilots. You don't want them shot down. If one of them does get shot down, then that's a bad thing. If one of the planes gets shot down and the pilot can just hop in to another plane and fly it remotely, great. You've kept all the skill and experience of your pilot. So maybe F-35s can be remote controlled. If they can be remote controlled, or even if they can't be remote controlled, could they be hacked? So there was a story from about a year ago of an Italian F-35 pilot in Europe who apparently got the bejesus scared out of him by a Russian fighter popping up next to him. I think not once, but twice, from nowhere. Now, if the report is true, and I can't verify that it is, but if the report is true, the Italian pilot stated things along the lines of, the Russian jet appeared visually alongside of him with no warning. It wasn't detected. He wasn't alerted to it. And also, he had to try to reboot his systems, like some of his targeting, detection systems, effectively blue screened, and he had to restart them. And this happened a couple of times. And this Russian jet was able to pop up alongside of him, and then get out of there, and then come back in again and have another go. Now, if this is a true story, then it would seem that there might be some capability to interfere with the navigation and targeting and detection systems of an F-35. From what range, I don't know. How it might be done, I don't know. But it's a possibility that perhaps even something like that happened to this jet, and that someone attempted to hack it, or at least attempted to disable its ability to fly. The pilot reportedly ejected safely. Well, at least has been taken to hospital. Ejection from a fighter jet is not something that you want to do. By all accounts, it is not something you wish to do. It can cause lifelong injury to you. Effectively, on your seat, you have rockets attached to your seat which explode and fire you out of the plane very, very quickly. The G-forces are incredible, even for fighter pilots who are trained to deal with them. Depending on the conditions and the orientation of the plane, and when it happens, there is the chance that you'll goose yourself, like in Top Gun, or you'll hit the canopy and you're dead, or you break all the bones in your body. So the pilot, I believe, has ejected safely in terms of being alive and is being treated in hospital. Thus far, no comment has been given by the pilot or released of what happened. So at this stage, nobody knows why the pilot ejected. The F-35s in question, I believe that they are part of the 71st Fighter Interceptor Squadron. No, sorry, that's not who they are part of. They're part of the Marine Fighter Attack Training Squadron, and they are they're for training pilots. So it may have been a pilot error, or something appeared to go wrong, which the pilot believed required them to eject. There was reportedly a second F-35 flying with this one, and it returned safely to base. Now, again, I don't know what the protocol is. Perhaps if a pilot ejects and you've got a wingman or someone flying with you, your job is to do the best you can to circle around and identify and target exactly where they've landed and call in support, and you don't worry about the plane because the plane's going to crash. Only in this case, the plane didn't crash, it seems. Anyhow, maybe it did, but it seems it flew for some period of time without crashing. So again, one of the questions is, why didn't the other jet follow that one just to see what the hell was going on if it noticed it was still flying? But again, we don't know. Maybe he was doing some high-speed maneuver or something and the jet took off and they weren't able to track it visually. I don't know. One of the stories that came out today in social media was the suggestion that the jet had been flown to Cuba. Now, I don't think that has happened. What has come out this afternoon, a few hours ago, about 5 hours ago before I did this report, was that the US military officials are now suggesting that they have found a wreckage, a debris field, which I assume they believe is the jet. They've asked people to stay away from the area, but it's the jet. And it's a couple of hours from an Air Force base is where it has been found. Now, look, until you get more detail on this, I guess it's a perfect time to speculate. But you could speculate that the jet hasn't been found yet and that that's a cover story. If we think about the UFO Twitter, that's the sort of thing that would fit right into their wheelhouse. It's like this is becoming the cover story for what's really happening. It hasn't been found. It has been flown to Cuba. Now, I'm not saying it has been flown to Cuba, but if you were to hijack a plane like this, or hack it in some way, and be able to control it, then who knows what you could do. If you had managed to do that, I would imagine that it's possible that you could control the flight path of the aircraft. Someone I saw when this first came out earlier today, this suggestion that it may have been flown to Cuba, they said, this is ridiculous. I think this guy works in, I think it was this guy that works in aircraft area. It couldn't happen. And Cuba would be a problem. But interestingly, I checked out the maximum range. The maximum range on F-35 is 2,200 kilometers. The distance from South Carolina to Cuba is only 1,400 or 1,400 kilometers. So you've got another 8,000 Ks in the tank, depending on how much it already flown and if it was fully fueled. But in theory, and maybe this is why this is such a cool sounding story, is that you could have flown that thing to Cuba. Now, if that was the case, if that jet was hacked, and remember that electronic warfare is a big part of modern warfare, and electronic warfare has often, or at least always been reported, that the Russians, the Ukrainians are really good at the hacking. Maybe they are, maybe they're just like everyone else, I don't know. But if you could have hacked this thing and you flew it to Cuba, that would be the closest friendly base that the Russians or Chinese would have to land it. Anyhow, it's an interesting story. As I say, and the reason what's kind of still fueling this story is that at least when I went to start recording this, the American military had not released any photographic evidence of the debris field. And again, there's probably a good reason for that. Depending on the debris, it might be showing construction and parts of the plane which they don't want to make public. Completely understandable. On the other hand, the part of your brain which just likes to think what might have happened here, you'd like to see some clear footage, some evidence, and someone, with a video. Look, here, I found it on my phone. Yeah, here it is. And you go, oh yeah, I can see that thing crashing. Yeah, it's been geolocated. It's in South Carolina. You'd put it to bed and say, okay, it crashed. It's gone. But we're still waiting for that. So this is an interesting one. Anyhow, moving on from that. Look, while the US is having challenges keeping track of their most advanced fighter, the Secretary for the Russian Security Council, Nikolai Patrushev, is meeting with the Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi in Moscow, and they're talking about strategic security. This is part of a 4-day series of talks, and this comes after the May 23, meeting between the Russian Prime Minister Mikhail Mishustin and Chinese Premier Li Qiang, when they met in Beijing. And the 4-day meeting now with Wang Yi and Nikolai Patrushev is expected to precede a future visit from President Xi Jinping to visit President Putin in Russia. The reporting from the meeting is that the Beijing and Moscow diplomats noted closeness in their positions on Washington's anti-Russian and anti-Chinese stance. They agreed that any bid to resolve the Ukraine crisis must involve Moscow. Now, this relates to Ukrainian President Zelensky's reported peace plan, the one which was discussed a few weeks ago in Jeddah, where a number of nations declined to attend because basically President Zelensky's peace plan is effectively everything goes back to the old borders, 1991 borders, before Russia even had Crimea. Russia doesn't come to these negotiations, so they're not really peace talks. It's some sort of weird PR play to say, hey, we're talking about peace talks. Yes, we're all for peace, but we're only going to talk about it with our allies. We're not going to talk about it with Russia, who needs to be involved, clearly. And Russia holds the upper hand in any negotiations when they do begin. Russia has also said many times that they're willing to negotiate. They just need to see their goals achieved. And this is something which I think the West is is missing in their expectations of Russia coming to the negotiating table. Even if, let's say, the Ukrainian offensive had been successful and had pushed down through the Mariupol and Tokmak and got to the Sea of Azov, and they blew the Kerch Strait Bridge and said, look, we've got Ukraine, it's a bargaining chip, come and negotiate with us. I think even then the Russians would have said, no, yet. This is because their stated goals, one of them, the demilitarization of Ukraine, and a neutral status of Ukraine and no entry to NATO. If those things aren't met, I don't think that Putin is going to stop. I think that they will continue to press for those goals and to aim to achieve them. And when they feel they have been achieved, then they will negotiate. And what that negotiation will involve then, I don't know. We've got to see when it is that Russia feels they've achieved those goals. They've seen as they put it, the denazification and the demilitarization of Ukraine. I'm might just jump ahead a little bit. Just to finish that off, and just remember too, just days before the start of the special military operation, just before Russia went into Ukraine, President Putin, President Xi signed a statement proclaiming no limits to the Sino-Russian cooperation, no forbidden zones. So we see this meeting with Wang Yi now, the previous meeting with the Russian Prime Minister, likely another meeting between Xi and President Putin. All of this when they are not attending summits so that they can avoid talking to Biden. The closeness is growing all the time between Russia and China. This appears to be one of those great unintended consequences that the West or the US is now having to deal with, in that this Ukrainian proxy war against Russia, which was meant to weaken Russia and leave them a hollow husk, a shell, unable to do anything geopolitically, instead has strengthened them. And instead of setting up the West to then be a powerful force to take on China, it has pushed Russia into China's arms and strengthened their ties, hastened the de-dollarization of the US dollar. These are things which the US did not want to happen as part of this Ukrainian offensive. Sorry, this Ukrainian adventure. Even out of the meetings that are happening this week with Wang Yi, he has arrived in Russia just after being in Malta and speaking there with White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan. And he's come straight from that, straight to meetings now with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, and contents reporting from the discussions today are that the ministry has added that Wang briefed Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov about the content of negotiations with Sullivan. So Jake Sullivan, the US will not be particularly happy to hear now that what they were talking about with the Chinese, the Chinese have just met with the Russians and they are now talking about that themselves. Okay, so I'm going to jump onto the battle update now of what is happening, and I might just start in the Donetsk area because of something I touched on just before. So this is the Ministry of Defence daily update. For those of you who watch this show, you'll know the background as to why I use this as a source. Let's just go to Donetsk. In the Donetsk direction, units of the Yug group of forces in cooperation with aviation and artillery repelled 6 enemy attacks near Kleshevka, Veseloy, Mayorsk, Marinka and Vodiane in the Donetsk People's Republic. Now in Andrivka, let's just go to our map up here. This might take a moment because I hadn't prepared it earlier. Andrivka. Maybe I'll try this map. Apologies for this terrible production quality. I need a producer. Andrivka. Oh, wrong one. Andrivka. Here we go. Now, Andrivka on our map, he says, showing the map to the people watching, finally. Yeah. There's Andrivka there, the purple icon just here. Now, Andrivka is the very tiny settlement just south of Klishchiivka, and Klishchiivka is just south of the city of Bakhmut. Bakhmut we're all familiar with because of the fighting that's been going on there for months and months. The Russians claiming it maybe March of this year, some time ago. The Ukrainians now attempting to take Klishchiivka to allow them to attack from the south on Bakhmut and put pressure on Bakhmut from the south. Now, in Andrivka, in this little settlement here, we spoke about this the other day. This is the one which has the underground rail facilities. If I zoom right in, you can see that Andrivka is only a tiny little place, maybe 30 houses or something. And down here, we can see the entranceway to an underground railway facility. Exactly what's under there, I don't know, but reportedly the Russian forces have been using this as a place to retreat to when the Ukrainians attempt to move into Andrivka. Now, if you look at this is what Andrivka looked like before, houses and trees and things. So, a Ukrainian group have released a photo today of them holding a flag in Andrivka. So you can look in the background there and you can see what Andrivka looks like now. It's a wasteland. All of the trees have been destroyed and denuded. All of the houses have been destroyed. And interestingly, you can see the flag that's being held by the Ukrainian forces in Andrivka. For those people who are not watching this, but they're just listening, the flag has a number of Nazi symbols on it. The black sun and the wolf's angel are on there. Now, this is also problematic for President Zelensky. The Ukrainian media and Western media have pushed long and hard to discredit any reports that there is a nationalistic movement within Ukraine. So pictures like this, when Ukrainian forces are claiming to have successfully captured a township. Now, as I said, Andrivka is tiny, 30 houses or so, but in the PR plans of the Ukrainian leadership, a successful capture of a township is something to be crowed about at the moment. And with Zelensky going to Washington this week, had Andrivka, if it's been captured, and the Ukrainians do hold control over it now, he would want to talk about that. Many of the Americans, even many of the Americans in Congress, will have no idea where Andrivka is. And they could show them a map of any city or town in Ukraine, and they would believe that was it. And by saying they'd taken it, that would give them some extra support. Yeah, you've been successful. However, if you do go and search around for Andrivka being captured today, this is one of the top images that comes up. So this makes it, again, a little bit tough for Zelensky to use this even as a PR win because of this picture here. All right, anyhow, I just thought that was an interesting choice of image to be showed when Andrivka is allegedly being captured by the Ukrainians. All right, rolling on through Donetsk. Up to 255 Ukrainian personnel, 3 armoured fighting vehicles and 7 motor vehicles have been neutralised in the Donetsk region. Get my other map back here. In counter-battery warfare, 3 armoured fighting vehicles and 7 motor vehicles have been neutralised. In counter-battery warfare, the Russian troops hit one US-made M777 artillery system, one Polish-made Krab self-propelled artillery system, and one D-30 howitzer. We're going to the map here, so this is our Donetsk region down here. This is where we were talking about, Avdiivka there. Moreover, an ammunition depot of the 110th Mechanised Brigade of the Ukrainian Armed Forces was destroyed close to Avdiivka. In the Zaporozhye region, so if we move now to Zaporozhye, here we're talking about Robotny and Verbova, this area here. In Zaporozhye, efforts of the Russian group in forces in combination with airstrikes, artillery fire and heavy flame-throwing systems defeated a cluster of manpower and hardware of the 71st Jaeger Brigade near Verbova in the Zaporozhye region. So this is Robotny here and this is Verbova just here. Up to 55 Ukrainian troops, 2 armoured fighting vehicles, 3 pickup trucks, 2 D-30 howitzers, 1 US-made M119 gun, as well as another AN-TPQ-50 counter-battery radar station have been eliminated. We've spoken a number of times about those counter-battery radar stations, how they work and why they're so vital and why they're such prime targets for the Russians to attempt to pick off. In the Kherson region, so moving down here to the, whoa, just put that map back. In the Kherson region, down here, over 80 Ukrainian troops, 5 motor vehicles and 2 D-30 howitzers have been destroyed during the day. Now, 80 troops reportedly killed and wounded in Kherson is an uptick in activity there. Military Summary Channel and his reporting has shown that the Russians have been focusing some attention sort of from Berislav all the way down to the Antonovsky Bridge and to even to this Kherson and south of Kherson, all along this western border of the river. There have been Russian bomb and drone strikes along here. So it seems as though the Ukrainians may be amassing some forces in this area. There has been talk about this for a while, and there was an attempt a few weeks ago to land a few people in Kozachi-Laheri. That was ultimately repelled by the Russians. The Ukrainians were pushed back out. There has been talk over the last few weeks of increased Ukrainian activity in the island regions of the Dnieper River along here. So perhaps there is a push here for the Ukrainians to get and gain some territory in the Kherson region. Okay, moving from Kherson and get ourselves back up this way into the South Donetsk region around Originating, Staramayosk, this area here. What has been happening in South Donetsk? This is where the Vostok group of forces are operating using aviation, artillery and heavy flamethrowers. They have inflicted a defeat on Ukrainian manpower and hardware of the 31st Mechanised Brigade and the 128th Territorial Defence Brigade near Staramayosk and Originating. The reported losses in this area, so this is Originating right here. Staramayosk is just the accompanying township here. They're not separated by any great distance at all. The losses amounted to more than 180 Ukrainian troops killed and wounded. Remember, this is not the weekly summary, this is the daily summary, so this is within one day. That was 80 people reported killed and lost in Kherson yesterday, 180 reported killed and lost here. 3 armoured fighting vehicles, 11 motor vehicles, as well as 1 D-20 howitzer. Also, an ammunition depot of the 38th Marine Brigade was destroyed here. In moving up our front line now, to the Krasny Liman area here, where we have the forest, the Kremenaya forest area in Krasny Liman. 2 attacks launched by assault detachments of the 67th Mechanised Brigade and the 12th Special Forces Brigade of the Ukrainian Armed Forces close to Chervonaya Dobrova and the Serebryansky Forestry were repelled by professional efforts of the Centre Group of Forces, helicopter strikes and artillery fire. The helicopters most likely operating this area are the Ka-52, the attack helicopters. These are proved to be very effective against tanks and armoured equipment. They have, I believe, recently been upgraded to carry rockets, which are anti-tank guided missiles that are now capable of operating at ranges somewhere between 12 and 15 kilometres. So as we talked about the other night, very difficult if you are in a tank or piece of APC or something like that to see a helicopter that's just sitting over a hill 12 kilometres away and taking shots at you. In this area, the reported losses amounted to more than 50 Ukrainian troops, 2 armoured fighting vehicles, 3 motor vehicles, as well as 1 D-20 howitzer. And if we just move up the line a little bit to Kupiansk, this red line that we're following up here is about 90 kilometres in length. So it's about 90 kilometres from Krasny Liman up to Kupiansk here. In Kupiansk, airstrikes and artillery fire of the Zapad group of forces hit manpower and hardware of the 14th, 30th, 92nd Mechanised and 25th Airborne Brigades of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, as well as the 103rd Territorial Defence Brigade near Sinkovka. And Sinkovka is up here, just near Kupiansk. Berestoyev in the Kharkov region, and Novosilovskoye and Artyomovka. Up to 20 Ukrainian troops, 2 armoured fighting vehicles, 2 motor vehicles, and 1 US-made M777 artillery system and 2 M-Star-B howitzers were destroyed. What was interesting in this area just recently is that Ukrainians have been having successful attacks here in this area of Pisky. Now, Pisky is very close to the Russian border here, and it sits on one of the supply roads from Russia in to support this entire front. So while the Ukrainians have been struggling in other areas, in this area they're having some success getting behind the main Russian lines and doing some disruption to their supply routes there. This area is interesting along this front as to just what is happening here, what the Russian intention is here. The Russians seem to have made progress here without really being strategically planned. They seem to make tactical advances all the way along this line, and now seem to have perhaps slowed somewhat in their advance. But we don't know what the real goal or what the tactic here is. It may be that the Ministry of Defence wants them to just sit there, maintain their positions, perhaps dig in where they are, establish a defensive line where they are, and that the plan to actually push towards the Oskol River, which runs from Kupiansk down here, that to push for that may wait until after the Rapotist, after the rains have happened and the ground is frozen again. I don't know what the Russian tactics are here. But another theory is that the Russians are building forces in this area and not looking to press forward yet, because they are actually attempting to develop a major cauldron in this area around here. So in effect trying to draw Ukrainian forces up into this area and then drive up from the south, push back through Robotny, go up past Zaporozhye and Dnipro up here to Poltava, and then at Poltava join forces coming across from the Russian border from up above Sumy up here, and cut this entire area off, and all the Ukrainian forces that are in here would then be effectively trapped within a cauldron. So who knows, that might be why we're seeing the Russian progress here seem to slow, in that they are happy to just sit there now and slowly move their way forward. Okay, that's about it for the update for today. I hope you're enjoying the reports. I will be doing part 2 on the weapons of war, which I'm doing a summary of the different tools, moving up in towards artillery pieces and air defense, and getting our way up into aircraft and jets as we go through about 4 series. The first one's out. If you just check on the channel, it covers off some interesting landmines and grenades and things like that. Covers off a pretty mean Russian triple pump action shot grenade launcher that is capable of firing a small thermobaric warhead. Like, some of the kit that's being used is really quite amazing, devastatingly dangerous and deadly, but impressive in its capability. Anyhow, so some more episodes coming out. Look, if you have watched this far, thank you very much for watching. I hope you're enjoying the show. If you haven't already subscribed and you've enjoyed this, please subscribe, and I look forward to speaking to you again soon.